I want to go over some MIG welding basic stuff just to set standard here. So generally I find if you use these two settings, it'll do 80 to 90% of the jobs that come in. So if you're doing anything over quarter inch, usually I'm at 500 inches per minute, 25 volts, 500 inches per minute. If I'm doing 1/8, I say 19,300. And in those ranges, you can kind of move around a bit, but generally I find those produce the best weld. So I'm going to kind of do two demonstrations of these welds. I'm going to do a 19,300 with some 1/8, and then some or some 14 gauge, and then some quarter inch stuff. The gas we use is MIG Mix Gold, and the wire is 035 hard wire. So if you want to take a look in the side of these machines, you can see right here, this is solid cord wire, 035 diameter. Okay, so what we're going to do before we start welding, we want to make sure the whip's nice and straight, because if the whip has a coil in it and it's getting pushed over there, sometimes it gets jittery. So what I usually recommend is just when you get the welding gun, make sure you get a pair of welding pliers. You can see there's some spatter in here. Put this in there, clean it up. Same thing with the welding tip. Generally what I recommend to people is if you have to cut the wire, what I find is if you pull the slack out of the wire, and you can bend it. So I mean, 9 times out of 10, anyone that has side cutters as a welding plier, like I don't think it's useful. And even with the welding tip on, as long as the welding tip isn't the point where it's getting bent around, like again, you can just, if you pull the slack out of the wire and you pull the slack and you kind of bend it back and forth, it'll break right there. So that's what I find. The other thing too is if your tip gets filled with, if let's say your tip is jammed up, so and the welding wire's not coming out, don't force it. What you want to do is sometimes you can shake the whip and it'll pop out. Other times if it's really bad, what I recommend doing, instead of changing the tip, because that takes a while and it's very, very, we don't do enough welding here to wear the tips out where the welding wire is coming out at an angle, and that's really 9 times out of 10 when you should change a welding tip. But usually, and you do this, right, and you flick the wire out, because sometimes it has a burr, and then what I do is I kind of, as I'm pulling the wire out, and I just kind of chamfer out the tip so it doesn't have a sharp edge where the grinder came out, so it doesn't kind of wear on that. So that's some basics about this. Want to make sure everything's clean, the tip's good. So now what I do is I'm just going to get this set up and so I'm going to come and weld, and especially for long things, I don't have my gun straight on like this. I'm pushing, right? So I push and I have a slight angle like this. And what I try to do for long welds and just in general helps when you don't have to be that steady, is I'll run the tip along the piece, right? So that's why it's important to have it clean. Otherwise it kind of gets as it gets heated up, it gets a bit gummy and sticky. But I find that's like kind of a little handy little trick for if you're having struggle doing long welds. You just run the tip along the edge there, and that's about a handy little trick. But to get that, you can't get the gun perfectly straight on like this. You kind of want to twist the gun and go like that, and you'll be able to look where I want that weld to be when I'm shooting I'm shooting the arc out. So, and if you really wanted a nice clean weld, you can grind the mill scale off with a hard disc or a resin fiber disc. Don't use a flap disc because it gets all gummed up really quickly with the mill scale. So I'm just going to tack this. And you can see, to tack something too, a handy little trick is I just kind of, I know everything's all clean and good, so I just usually bury the gun in there, and I can tack it without really having to pay attention to the nth degree about it. So I don't flip my welding mask down and tack. So I don't have to flip my welding mask down and tack something. You can just tack it, and there you go. The reason why I tack either side on this is so it kind of pulls it half straight. You can So another thing to do is if it's just a little weld, the other side of what you can do is like you hold your gun and you just drag your hand along. It's best to do a dry run too beforehand. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and weld this, and you guys will get a good arc shot of seeing the weld it. And this is 14 gauge, so this should be 19-300. Okay. See, that weld looks pretty good. Now the benefit of this is it's not too hot, it's not too cold. I mean, it's a good solid weld. Or sorry, 25-500. It's easy to remember, right? You multiply 25 times 2 is 500. So, and it doesn't need to be exact, but that's close enough. And we're gonna come and weld this 1/4 inch plate I got set up. Nice looking weld. Now, one thing that's worth being said is it's generally best, a fillet size should be half the thickness of the material. When you get to thinner stuff like this 14 gauge, like obviously you're not going to be able to do that, but generally you know, you wouldn't want like a 10 millimeter weld or like a huge weld on this, because it doesn't need to be that strong. So what I'm going to do quickly on the back is just a stop and a start. I'm going to feed the welder in, and I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to show you what a stop and start should look like. So that's the weld there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld back into it, and the two craters are going to blend out. Now, the other thing you can do is you chip that little bit of silica. That's just the mill scale and dirt coming off, and it just helps your arc stay a bit more stable. There, this weld is nice and flat. The other thing you can do is if you were to start here, and weld here, and then you weld the crater, because this is what the end of your weld looks like. It's really hot, and it ends up with a little divot, where the beginning of the weld almost looks a little bit cold and like you know, protruding. So you want to blend that out. So if I did a start here and I went this way, and I did a start here and I went this way, it would blend it out as well. Welding tubing is very important as well. Is you want to tack your corners. Don't tack in the middle, because when you're, and this stands for a lot of things, is don't tack stuff in the middle, because when you go to weld over it, you're just gonna have to weld over a big ball, and you're gonna have a hard time making your weld look good. So I find it best you can tack your piece in your corners. And now what I want to do is I want to kind of show you the best way to go about welding tube with base plates or even other tubing, and how your stops and starts should look. So if I weld this way here, I'm going to have a cold start here, and the divot is hot over here. I'm going to rotate the tube over here. I'm going to have a cold start here, and I'm going to blend the hot end in with the cold start. And I'm going to rotate the tube, have a cold start here, blend it over here. Then all you need to do is just have a one point where you're going to have a little bit of a corner where it's a little harder to blend out. But I'll weld this quick, and then you get an idea and see this. It's still at 25-500. I'm just going to weld this a little bit quicker. It'll be fine. Okay, so you see it's cold here and it's hot over there. So I'm just going to keep working my way around. Right here is where I'm saying is you have the hot end right there and the cold start that's coming, that I'm gonna have to start on it. So that's the only real tricky thing about this. And I just let it sit there for a second. And that's good. So you get an idea where when this gets painted, that's gonna look really good because the stops and starts blend real nice together. And you know, you're gonna have one right here. If you zoom in, you can see it's just got a little bit of a lump there, but that's good. But to the point of thinking about weld progression and how you're gonna weld something and it's all gonna blend out, whenever you're welding tube, you know, unless there's a specific reason, you always wanna wrap your corners and make sure things look good. Make sure you do this is you get a scraper and you can scrape your welds. Not can, you should. Like, get all the splatter off of it. You can get a wire wheel, and sometimes that'll take 90% of it off, but that's just something to keep in mind. So make sure you shut the welder off, turn the gas off at the end of the day, after you're done using it too, and wrap the welder up nicely for the next person to use.